I worked on a case a number of years back. It was in Kings County in Hanford, California, the case of California versus Whitty. This was a woman who took in foster children. She also had a live-in boyfriend. The case involved one of her foster daughters who was brought to a children's hospital in Fresno, examined for some illness that she had, and then sent home. During the exam, though, doctors and medical personnel suspected sexual abuse of the child. And as you know, the law in the state of California requires that medical personnel then follow up on that suspicion. So they found a way to call the child back to the hospital. Before the child went back to the hospital, the mother became suspicious that the reason they wanted the child back had to do with something other than her illness, and that is they had some suspicion of this problem. The case involved then a note. This mother evidently decided that she would end the child's life so that her live-in boyfriend would not be implicated in any kind of investigation of sexual abuse. She sat the child down at her kitchen table and dictated the child's own suicide note. That is, from the child's perspective, she wrote a note about her own suicide in her own handwriting. My part of this case involved looking at the suicide note. Now, I didn't have much written data from the child to determine whether the suicide note was written in the language of the child or not. I had considerable amount, literally hundreds of pages of writing from the mother, and what I determined was that the mother's language was represented in the suicide note, even though the note itself was written in the child's handwriting. That, with other evidence, served to eventually have the woman convicted of murder and sent to prison for life without parole. Unfortunately, what happened to the little girl was that she was poisoned. It's poison in her pudding. She died at the home, and the mother then was accused of the crime.
So is it possible to look at the ransom note not by looking at the handwriting, but looking at the language and determining if it is Patsy's language? So how about we ask Patsy? Is that possible, Patsy?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
And is it possible that Patsy wasn't trying to protect Burke by writing the ransom note, but she was trying to protect herself, her image, and John? Like, how would it look if her little beauty was being molested by her husband? Is that a motivation to write the ransom note and not report him to the police? Now consider this case that has similarities to the JonBenet Ramsey case about this 5-month-old baby that just vanished in the night. I don't believe that's what happened. I believe the husband is the one that somehow killed the baby, and they made up this story.
During the evening of November 23, 1997, Steve and Marlene watched a Disney movie with their 2 oldest children before putting all of their children to bed. Their children were 8-year-old William, 4-year-old Monica, and Sabrina, who was only 4 days shy of being 5 months old. Marlene last checked on Sabrina between 11 p.m. and 12 a.m. In the morning, now on November 24, Marlene woke William up at about 6:30 a.m. She noticed that the door between the laundry room and the garage was open. In addition, the garage door was open. Marlene could see all the way out to the street. She immediately made her way to Sabrina's room, but Sabrina was not there. Sabrina's yellow blanket was missing as well. Marlene called 911 and told them Sabrina was missing. The police quickly responded. Steve and Marlene told the police that they had left their garage door open all night by accident. The door between the laundry room and the garage was always left unlocked, but they said it was closed on the night of November 23. A massive manhunt was initiated. There was no sign of Sabrina. Investigators started to focus their attention on Steve and Marlene. thinking that perhaps they were involved in the disappearance. There are a few items that led them to consider this possibility, many of which do not necessarily point to guilt, but investigators interpreted the items as suspicious. In the opinion of the police, there was not much evidence that someone had entered the house, other than the fact that Sabrina was missing. Like nothing was really disturbed or broken, no property was stolen. It was the actions of the Eisenbergs which left Sabrina vulnerable, namely leaving the garage door open and the door to the laundry room unlocked. How would a potential kidnapper have known about this vulnerability? Furthermore, how would they know that the Eisenbergs had a baby and where her room was located? The family had a dog named Brownie, but he never barked to alert the family to an intruder. In addition, the house was equipped with an alarm system. The Eisenbergs said it was turned off. The police felt that Marlene came across as cold during an appeal she made on TV. The day after the disappearance, media crews captured footage of Steve and Marlene smiling as they walked to a car with law enforcement. Investigators felt as though this was inconsistent with what the couple had recently experienced. Steve would later say that one of the officers said something that was funny.
No, not particularly.
Okay.
The Eisenbergs were critical of the police, suggesting they were looking for a body, not a living person. The officers were offended by this. Police gave the couple so-called lie detector tests. Steve passed, but Marlene's results were inconclusive. Steve and Marlene retained an attorney because they felt as though they were being targeted by law enforcement. They were correct, but the police still held this against them. The couple continued to talk to the media, which also aggravated the police, like they trusted the media more than law enforcement.
So some of the similarities that I see between these two cases is that they talked to the media, but not so much with the police. They reached out to their attorney so quickly, like they were thinking about being accused of the crime instead of finding the abductor or killer of their child. And they acted particularly unusual for their circumstances. Like John and Patsy, when JonBenet was missing, John was acting all calm, and Patsy was acting all like JonBenet was dead already. And they weren't clinging together or working together as a couple to locate their daughter. In both cases, there's little evidence of forced entry into the residence. And in both cases, the parents didn't seem to look for their lost child. I've heard of cases where the parents didn't call 911 for like an hour after they discovered their child missing, because that whole hour they were out looking around the neighborhood, searching the house, calling friends, doing everything to find their child. And then they called police. And in these two situations, they had the advantage of having one parent call for the police and the other parent doing the searching and looking for the lost child. Now you might think that I'm being too critical of John and Patsy Ramsey and looking back at their situation. But look at these two crimes, the Polly Klaas abduction and murder. Mark Klaas, her father, I believe, was separated from her mother, and he was a suspect. Yet he went in and did a polygraph test immediately, and he worked with the police, and he wasn't concerned at all about being accused of the crime, because his overwhelming thought process was trying to find his daughter. And so his top concern was not being arrested. His top concern was saving the life of his daughter. It was the love of his daughter. Now looking at the Adam Walsh case, it was very similar. The mother took little Adam to the mall, and he was abducted from the mall or outside the mall. So Mark Walsh's dad was a suspect. But yet he was down at the police station all that night and morning and went out on the news begging people for help to find his son. And again, his main concern was saving the life of his son and finding out who abducted his child. And he had no concern at all about being accused of the crime or being charged or arrested for the crime. His main focus, his total focus, was his son. Now, during the kidnapping phase of JonBenet, neither parent was looking for JonBenet or working with the police to give clues to help find their daughter. John was shown the ransom note, and he barely made any comments about the ransom note. Patsy was curled up in a ball and barely spoke at all with the detectives about what might have happened to her daughter. And neither parent spoke to their son Burke about what he knew. And then in the second phase, after JonBenet was found dead, their concern was for themselves. Patsy was too upset to go to the police station and do an interview. John, the next day, hired an attorney and refused to speak to the police after that point. And he makes the claim that they were ransoming the body, and that's why, and he was concerned about burying JonBenet. That was his focus, and that's why he didn't speak to the detectives. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved. And next week, we're going to show John kind of changing his story a few years after the death of his daughter. And I thought it was quite interesting. I came upon this just recently. So I'll see you next week with a new episode.